Hi! Before we start this video, I want to let you all know that I posted a new chapter of my webcomic, My Next Door Neighbors, on my webcomic channel. There's a link in the description if you want to watch it. Okay, now on to the video. Hello everyone! In this week's video, I am animating in FlipaClip for the first time. Many of you seem to like my other video where I tried to animate. I'm not an animating expert and there's still a lot I'm learning about it. Even so, many of you have been wanting to see me animate again and have been requesting I try out FlipaClip. FlipaClip is a free animation app that is available for iOS and Android. They are not sponsoring this video, just so you know that. I'm excited to give it a try, so let's get started. I'm actually starting by working in Clip Studio Paint. When I was looking up FlipaClip tutorials, I noticed many people would draw their keyframes in a different program and then import them into FlipaClip. So I decided to do the same because it seemed a lot easier to draw with something that I'm used to drawing with. So for my birthday a few months ago, I got a new phone. It's a Galaxy A51. It's a lot fancier than my previous phone. Anyways, you're probably wondering why I'm telling you about my phone. I found out that on newer phones you can set short videos as your lock screen. And ever since I found that out, I've wanted to make my own little animated lock screen starring one of my characters. So that's what I'm going to be creating. I decided to animate the main character of my webcomic, Doris. My idea is that she is watering a plant and then the plant starts to grow. Doris is surprised and a bit confused as to why the plant is growing so fast. But when the flower blooms, it makes her happy and she smiles. I'm really glad I drew the keyframes in a different program that I'm used to. I was able to easily move things around and set things up. And I wasn't super confused. FlipaClip is pretty limited when it comes to the drawing tools and their functions. Oh, also, if you don't know what keyframes are, basically they are like the main points in the animation, like when a character goes from one pose to another. So yeah, that's what I'm drawing here. So I have where Doris isn't watering the flower, then she starts watering the flower, and then she becomes surprised, and then she smiles. So here are the keyframes. Now that they are done, we will go into FlipaClip. So here's the main area of FlipaClip. I changed it to the dark theme to help protect my eyes. The bright theme was really bright, so I changed it to the dark theme. When I was trying to get a feel for how FlipaClip works, I made this simple animation of Tata kinda waving at us. I was just trying to get a feel for how the app works. It's super simple and not meant to be fancy or anything. Anyways, it's time to make a new project. So I click this button, I name the file and change the canvas size to 1080 by 1920. It calls this the TikTok size. It warns me that this size is kind of large and that it may run slower because it's a larger file, but my iPad seems to handle it just fine, thankfully. Then I tap Create Project. So this is where we will create the animation. We have the pen tool for drawing, the eraser tool for erasing, the selection tool for moving things around, the paint bucket for filling in colors, and the text tool for typing words. So I'm starting by importing my keyframes. I press the Add Image button and then get an ad. This software is free, so you get ads a lot of times when you go to new areas or open new things. Also, a lot of the features are locked behind a paywall, but we will talk about that later. The hardest part about importing the frames was scaling them to be the same size and then putting them in the same spot. For some reason, they kept importing in different sizes and positions, even though they are all the same size technically. Thankfully, the window was helpful for lining things up. Also, I press this button to add new frames, and my animation is set to 12 frames per second at the moment. I do up the frame amount a bit later. I currently find lower frame amounts easier to work with. Maybe someday I'll work myself up to 24 frames per second. After importing my frames, I made a new layer for line art, and this is when I realized I would need to draw a whole bunch of straight lines for the window. I am not good at drawing straight lines, plus FlipaClip doesn't have a stabilization option, so I was concerned for how this was going to turn out. Thankfully, I found this ruler. Thank goodness FlipaClip has this. It made drawing the window so much easier. Also, when working on the window, I thought I had to line up the ruler with where I want to draw. I later figured out that you don't have to draw on the ruler. Whatever angle the ruler is set to is the angle the pen will draw lines at all over the canvas. So yeah, I kept lining up the ruler with where I wanted to draw even though that wasn't necessary. After finishing the line art for the window, I wanted to add some color. Since the window stays the same throughout the entire animation, I thought that I would just fully finish it now and then paste it to all of the different frames. I made a new layer under my line art layer to add color, but it turns out that the bucket tool only pays attention to the layer that is selected, so I have to do the liner and coloring on the same layer. I thought this was kinda interesting. I'm surprised there's not an option to make the bucket tool pay attention to other layers instead of only the layer you have selected. I decided to make the building a light blue and I wanted to add a brick pattern to it. To help me draw the bricks and keep them the same, I turned on the grid. I wanted to change the size of the grid so I could have different sized bricks. But to change the grid, I need to pay money. I want to try to make this animation without paying for any of the extra features because 1, I'm kind of cheap, and 2, I have a feeling that many of my viewers use this app without paying for the extra features, so I want to try to do the same. For the bricks, I basically just draw a bunch of lines in an alternating pattern. This is where I figured out how the ruler works, so I didn't bother moving the ruler around. I was just able to draw a bunch of horizontal lines and a bunch of vertical lines. So I don't totally remember why, but I had copied the window to the other frames, but then I didn't like that I did that, so I deleted the windows on the other frames. I didn't read this window that popped up, I just kind of ignored it and proceeded to delete my window. When I went back to my first frame, I was really confused and scared that the window was gone. I was like, where did it go? Why did it disappear? So basically how layers work in FlipaClip is that all of the frames share layers. You can change what is drawn on that layer for each frame, but if you delete the layer, it will delete it on all of the frames. Thankfully, I still had the window in my copy and paste area, so I was able to paste the window back onto the first frame. I was really scared I would need to draw it again because I spent like half an hour working on it. After that happened, I named the layer window so I wouldn't lose it or accidentally delete it. Also, I somehow messed up, so I had to re-import my keyframes. I'm really new to this and I don't know what I'm doing, so please go easy on me. There was a lot of trial and error when working on this animation. Anyways, now I'm on to the line art. Like I mentioned earlier, there are no options for stabilization or line correction, so my lines will be less wobbly. So yeah, FlipaClip put my shaky hand to the test. I had to work really hard to make the lines look smooth. I have a really hard time drawing smooth lines on my iPad, so this was really tricky. Also, the line art is going to look really pixely because I'm super zoomed in and Doris is kind of small on my canvas. In hindsight, maybe I should have drawn Doris larger, but like I mentioned, this is for my phone lock screen, so I wanted it to be kind of small and in the bottom of the screen. That way I could still easily check the time and stuff. When I first started the line art, I was being really picky about the lines. Like, oh, it should look like this, and I want this to taper, and I kept drawing the lines over and over again. But then I zoomed out and I saw how small they were. So as time went on, I became less and less picky. When doing the line art for the other frames, I copy my line art from the first frame and then edit it to match the current keyframe. This helps keep things consistent and also saves a lot of time. I do a lot of selecting, moving, erasing, and redrawing different areas. The hair is what I have to change the most since it kind of moves when Doris moves. For everything else, I basically just move it around with the selection tool. After doing the line art for the keyframes, this is what I now have. I duplicated the keyframes to help me get an idea of what I want the pacing to be for the animation. It may feel a little fast, but I want this to be a short animation that plays when I open my lock screen, so I need the pacing to be kind of quick. So now we are on to the in-between frames. As the name suggests, these frames go in between the keyframes to help the animation look smoother. When working on keyframes, I like to use these things called onion skins. These allow me to see what the frame before and what the frame after are doing, so it makes drawing the frame in between a lot easier. When I went into the onion skin settings, I was disappointed to see that a lot of the settings are locked behind a paywall. If I want to make the onion skins colored, I need to pay, which is okay, I guess I can go without them being different colors. But what's a little mean, in my opinion, is that they lock being able to see the frame after, and that's kind of a needed thing. I need to see the frame before and the frame after to be able to draw the frame that goes in between those two. But like I mentioned, I don't want to pay money, so I kind of created a workaround for this. To kind of make it so that I have an onion skin for the after frame, I go onto the frame that has the after frame on it and lower the opacity. The onion skin setting allows me to see the frame before, so now I can see both frames. I copy the line art for the after frame onto a new layer so I can change it. My line art is now on different layers for the project. My plan was to merge them later, but it turns out I can't merge layers unless I pay money. So yeah, now I have 2 line art layers, but I was kind of preferring to have there only be 1 line art layer. But yeah. I then proceed to change the line art so that it is in between the 2 frames, so the transition is smoother and not so choppy. I always find doing in-betweens kind of fun because you just kind of draw in between the 2 pictures. It's also fun to see the result of the animation being smoother. Like I mentioned, I'm not very skilled when it comes to animating. I'm very new to it. I want to get better at capturing motion and expression. I feel like this animation turned out kind of stiff in the end. However, I am trying a new program that I've never used before, so I'll cut myself a little bit of slack. It was kind of tricky working in this program. It gets the job done, but it's kind of limiting, especially if you're trying to not purchase any of the extra features. After finishing the line art for the in-between, I erase the line art that I'm using as an onion skin on the other layer. I make sure not to delete the layer because, like I mentioned earlier, if I delete the layer on this frame, it'll delete it on all frames. But I am able to erase what's on this frame, so that's good. I basically just repeat the same process for all of the other in-between frames. One frame I found amusing is the one where Doris is transitioning to her closed eye smile at the end. I needed to draw her semi-blinking and her mouth turning into a smile. It ended up being a kind of derpy expression. Thankfully, we don't really see it in the final animation. So here's the animation with all of the in-betweens done. However, I decided that I didn't like her hair moving in unison with her surprised expression. When she goes up, her hair goes up, and when she goes down, her hair goes down. I later changed it so that they move separately. Oh, I had a lot of fun animating the flower growing. I just drew a line that got longer and longer on each frame. Then it sprouts out little leaves, and then the leaves kind of grow, and then it gets a little flower bud, and then it pops open. I'm happy with how the flower turned out. Also, I needed to add the water flowing from the can when Doris is watering the flower. I basically just draw a bunch of random lines coming from the can on each frame, and it kind of gives the appearance of water. This is where I decided to change the frame rate a little. I wanted the transition between frames to be a little faster, so I think I set it to like 14 or 15 frames per second. I also added more frames for areas I wanted to be held longer. Does anyone else find the frame area really confusing? For me, it feels kind of clunky and awkward to move the frames around. Maybe it's just because I'm not used to it. But yeah, I had to really think when I would be trying to do anything in this area. Okay, so now all of the frames are done and we can start coloring. The coloring process took me a lot longer than I thought it would. I start by filling in the flat colors. I go from frame to frame and fill in the colors. I start by filling in the hair on all of the different frames. Then I fill in the skin and so on. It's easier to color one area at a time, so I don't have to keep switching between colors. Also, remember how I mentioned earlier when I was working on the in-betweens that my line art is now on 2 different layers? Well, because the in-betweens are on different layers than the keyframes, I would have to change which layer I was on when filling in the colors. It's not a super big deal, but it did make the process feel a little bit more cumbersome. The areas that gave me the most trouble were the shirt and the pants, because I drew them with the pot in mind, but the pot is on a different layer, so the paint bucket tool ignores it. I had to draw a line across the bottom of the shirt in all of the frames so that I was able to fill it in. I also had to do a similar process for the pants. So yeah, that took me ages to fill in. After filling in all of the flat colors, it was time to add some shading and highlights and also add some details to the eyes. I'm actually going to be doing all of this on my top layer, which is the window layer. I want to be able to copy and paste the shading and eye details onto the other layers, and this is basically the only layer I have that I am able to do that on. So I add all of the shading and highlights and eye details on the window layer. Because this is my top layer, I had to be really careful when filling in the whites of the eyes and when shading the irises, because I didn't want to cover up the line art with my coloring. I keep the shading pretty simple. I added a bluish shadow to the whites of the eyes and a dark green to the top of the irises and around the edges. While doing this, I was super zoomed in and using a pretty small brush because, like I mentioned, I didn't want to cover my line art. After doing that, I add the highlights to the eyes. I also added highlights to the hair, some little pink ovals for blush. I also added some shading to the pot and the watering can. After shading the one frame, I copy and paste my shading to the other frames and modify it if needed. To make things easier, I copy the shading for Doris first and then copy the shading for the watering can and the plant pot later. Doris's shading needed to move around more, so it was easier to focus on lining up her shadows first. As I was doing this, I would also add shading to things like her mouth when it was open. It was really tricky trying to get the eye details to line up perfectly so I wouldn't cover anything up and also be in the right spot. I would have to super zoom in and then be really careful and move it around just a little bit until I got it lined up. So what are my thoughts on FlipaClip? I think it is a decent app considering it is free to use, and it's probably a nice way to start animating if you don't have anything else to animate with. It does get the job done, but to be honest, I probably won't use this app again unless you all really want me to. I definitely prefer animating in Clip Studio Paint. I am much more used to it, and it has a lot of really nice features to make the process smoother and easier. Even though FlipaClip isn't really the best fit for me, I'm really happy with how my animation of Doris turned out. I think it turned out decently considering I was using a new software. Also, this is how it looks on my phone. It's kind of funny because my phone goes back into sleep mode right after Doris smiles, so the animation ended up being like the perfect length. And I didn't even try to do that, so that was a nice coincidence. Also, I gave my patrons access to this file so they are able to download it and then use it on their own phone as their lock screen if they want to. So if you're interested in getting this animation of Doris for your own phone lock screen, please consider becoming a patron over on Patreon. Speaking of my patrons, thank you so much for helping support this channel. It means so much to me. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next week in my next video. Bye!